So we're continuing our theme of April foolery and fakery with fake button closures using magnets. Like all of the fake techniques, this one really isn't any easier than the real technique, in this case knitting a buttonhole, but it allows you some advantages when you're in a specific knitting situation that buttonholes may not provide. One of the advantages is that you can wait until your sweater is finished before you decide where you want your closure to be. Another advantage that you have is that you have more choices for what you want to be shown at your closure. I've used a much larger button than I could have used with a buttonhole given the width of this button band. But I could have left the button off altogether, or I could have chosen to use a different sort of decorative element, such as a crochet flower or anything else that you might want to put on the front of your sweater. There are a couple of disadvantages to a magnetic closure, and one is that the magnets are heavier than buttons. But if you're only closing your sweater at one point, the difference in weight is not really that great. You probably wouldn't want to replace 7 buttons down the front of a cardigan with 7 pairs of magnets. There are a couple of caveats to keep in mind if you're thinking about using a magnetic closure. One is that it is not an appropriate closure for somebody who has a pacemaker because magnets interfere with the functionality of pacemakers. And the second one that you might want to think about or do some research on is that for small children, say under the age of 6, many people advise not giving children access to magnets. So if there's some possibility that they could get at the magnet and swallow it, it can be really detrimental to their health, particularly if they also swallowed other pieces of metal. So now that you understand the advantages and disadvantages, let's go see how to install a magnetic closure. So for your magnetic closure, you are going to either need a pair of small, medium, or large rare earth sewing magnets, and you want the kind that have the PVC coating around them that will make it easier to install the magnet into your sweater, and it will also protect the steel case of the magnet from moisture and corrosion. You're also going to need sewing thread and a sturdy, sharp sewing needle and a couple of locking stitch markers, or you could use waste yarn instead. I would recommend grosgrain ribbon as a facing for the inside of your button bands. If you choose to use the ribbon facing, then you're going to need some straight pins, and it wouldn't hurt to have some sort of water-soluble marker or tailor's chalk or tailor's pencil in order to mark measurements on the ribbon. These sewing magnets are rare earth magnets. Neodymium is what they're made of. And you want the right match between your fabric and the magnet. So the thicker the fabric, the weaker the attraction will be between the two magnets, but the larger the magnet, the stronger the attraction will be. So you want to match them up appropriately. This is a 1/2 inch magnet, which is 12.7 millimeters. I'd use this for fingering or sport weight sweaters. I've separated this pair here. This is the 3/4 inch magnet, which is 19 millimeters. I would use this for DK, worsted, or Aran weight fabrics. And this is the 1 inch, which is 25.4 millimeters. And I would use this for bulky weight or super bulky fabrics. What I have here are two swatches that are representing 2 sweater fronts. This one is marked R for the right front. It's the right front as it's worn. This is the left front as it's worn. So the first thing I need to do is to decide which front is going to be lying on top of which other front. So do I want the right front over the left front, or do I want the left front over the right front? So for this example, I'm going to have the right front is going to be on top. So I'm going to use this as my pretend button. I'm going to want it right here. So I want to mark where I want this to be. So let's say I want it centered right here in between, in this purl column, between the two knit columns here, and I'll mark the same location on the other side. Now, since the right front is going to be on top of the left front, we use that to think about how the magnets need to be arranged. They need to be arranged. We have, this is the plus side, this is the minus. It doesn't matter which one goes on which piece. What's important is that the flat parts are facing each other. As the two pieces of fabric come together, they need to be facing. So that means the right front needs to have the magnet facing down, and the left front needs the magnet to be facing up through the two pieces of fabric. So I'm going to put this one face down and this one the minus up. So it's going to be against the fabric like this. So when we turn it around, we don't see the plus sign, we see the flat part. On this one, we see the plus part facing us, so that we can know that this is going to end up having the two pieces pulling together strongly. So here's where we want it centered. So we could just sew these directly to the fabric if we wanted. Maybe the quickest way to do that. It's tricky to sew woven fabric to knitted fabric. It's even trickier to sew a stiff plastic to a knitted fabric. So, and you may not want that just sitting there exposed like that. You can have a piece of ribbon sewn over the top of it to cover that up. You're going to sew the magnet to the ribbon first, then you got to flip this a second time. So now you have to flip it so it's like this, so that this is sewn to the ribbon here, so that when you flip it this way, the negative sign will be against the ribbing. And this will be flipped like this. These ribbons are longer so that you have some room to play with. So make sure that this one is centered on here. So you line them up so you know that these are going to have, the two pieces of ribbon are going to have the same amount above and below when you're finished. So what I'm going to do is mark where I'm sewing this to the ribbon so that I have guidelines. This one is for the right front, so I'm going to put an R on here, and this is a minus sign showing. I'm going to write the minus sign on here. I'm going to start my sewing here, and this is the left, and I'm not writing anything on here because I can't see a symbol on here, so I'm just saying that this is for the left and this is for the right. So I've marked where I want my fold lines to be for these so that they'll both match up. The magnets are going to match up, and the ribbons are going to be the same length for both pieces of fabric. And then I will trim just a little bit longer for each one of them. So here I have folded each of the pieces of ribbon along the fold line, and I pin them just inside the edges here so that they're the same length. And now I'm going to do some additional pinning. I want to pin horizontally so that I'm not stretching vertically. So if you're going to have a decorative element that you're going to sew on the outside, depends on what it is. If it's a crochet flower or something like this acorn, you might want to do it after you've sewn all of this on. Just depends on how you're going to deal with the ends, if you're using yarn or sewing thread or what you're doing. If you have a button, then you'd probably want to sew it on right before you pin the magnet down. But it would be a little hard to do your pinning if you had something big and bulky on the back side. So you just need to use some common sense about what you're going to do and when. So here are the two completed fronts with the magnetic closures, this marks the point where the button would be, or your decorative element would be, your flower, whatever it would be that you would sew on there. On the insides, you can see that the ribbon has been sewn on, and I used a lighter colored gray and then white here just so you can see where these things are. If you used a thread that perfectly matched your ribbon, then this seaming would, or these lines would be invisible. I just used tiny little whip stitch all along the edges to seam in place. The nice thing about ribbon is that because you've measured to a specific point and you've seamed it to the inside edge, it forces that edge to remain straight across rather than pulling in. Even if you pick up enough extra stitches along the edge, or you don't skip any along the edge, the ribbing will often want to pull up and won't want to hang even with the rest of the sweater. Well, I hope you learned something about options for closures other than using buttons and buttonholes. If you have any questions, you can leave them down in the comments below, or you can join my Ravelry group, Rocks, and ask your questions there. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe.